Welcome to the Poetry Flash reading series. As Harold said, I'm Joyce Jenkins, Poetry Flash editor and director. Tonight we are honored and delighted, really delighted, to present this tribute to the poet Bert Meyers, a celebration for the new collection on his life and work in the Unsung Masters Series. Visit poetryflash.org to check out our book reviews, interviews, and more, and to find upcoming news about Poetry Flash readings and literary events all over the state of California. A review of Sonoma County Poet Laureate Elizabeth Herron's new book is featured on the front page. She'll be reading with Gail Entrican, another wonderful East Bay poet, here in this room on Sunday at 3 o'clock. If you would like to receive an email about that event and aren't already on our list, please sign up at poetryflash.org or on our analog clipboard at the book table. We have copies of the beautiful new Bert Meyers book here for purchase. It's also available online at bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash. Again, thanks to Harold Adler, who you've already met, and the Art House Gallery for this wonderful space. Perfect era, don't you think? Just the right time. To Rosalinda Monroy and Stephen Bunza from Poetry Flash for their help and support, and to our videographer today, Steve Kay. Videos of our events are posted on the Poetry Flash YouTube channel. So I'd like to introduce to you Richard Silberg, Poetry Flash Associate Editor.
Hi. As Joyce told you, we're here to remember and celebrate Bert Meyers. And this book on the life and work of an American master. Now, I don't know if you can all see this picture. Can you see it pretty well? He's not smiling. He's not looking intensely contemplative. He looks like he might be suffering. It's very interesting. Bert Meyers, I never knew him. I know him only through this book. But he was obviously a tremendously intense, original, passionate man, and a man who had a profound influence on the people who knew him or studied with him. He was the son of Romanian and Polish Jewish immigrants. He basically crashed out of high school, and then he did manual labor. He was a janitor. He did farm work and settled on framing pictures and gilding pictures. And in all that time, he was intensely studying, autodidactically studying poetry. And Claremont Graduate School accepted him. He had, as I said, he didn't even have a high school diploma. But they accepted him on his poetry. Now, the notes say that he got a PhD, but Maurya Simon in the book says he actually only got a master's and was disillusioned by.
Can I just
Sure.
say what happened? He had gone all the way through the PhD and written everything, but he had a disagreement with his professor, and he just decided, I'm not doing any more, and he already had a job teaching, so.
Okay. Just that gives you an idea of a contentious man, intensely independent man. Now, his poetry is intensely image-centered. As you will probably hear and as you will read if you get this book, the poems are an amazing string, like fireworks of images. So he was, we could say, an American surrealist, but these images, to me, somehow are not dream images or unconscious. They're somehow daylight images, intense, focusing on this world we're all awake in and suffering through or celebrating. So, we have three poets and two poets, and are you okay? We'll say we got three poets here, three poets and a jeweler. A jeweler set in poetry. Whoa. So I'll introduce our three speakers as they come. Our first speaker is Anat Silvera, who is Bert's daughter. She, as I said, she's one of the founders of the Silvera Jewelry School. She's shown her work, beadwork and metalwork, around the country. So here she is, Anat Silvera.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone who's involved. Joyce, thank you, and all of you at Poetry Flash for everything you did to organize this. Really means a lot. And thank you all for coming here. I see lots of familiar faces, a few people I don't know, but it's wonderful to see you all. There's even we have a student of Bert's who flew out from Michigan. I have a relative of my father's who I just reunited with last year. And then lots of friends and other family members here. And it's just wonderful to have you all here. So, I'm first going to talk a little bit about my father. Then I'm going to read, and I have things I'm going to intersperse with poems. My father, who I called Abba, which is father in Hebrew. So I just want to make it clear, I knew my father as a kid and a teenager, and then he died. So I never knew him as an adult. I was barely 20, and I had been away for a few years. So I was just thinking about that. Like, what I write about is, So my father, who I called Abba, taught me a way of looking at the world that deeply influenced me. He believed that to be a good artist or poet, one must work at it every day, because it is a process, that even sitting and writing a line, some images, or just staring at the world around you were all part of that process. I have always remembered that, and as an artist, I follow Bert's advice and even encourage my students to do the same. Bert taught me a way of looking at the world that helped me become an artist. He used to tell me that he didn't care what I did for a living. There was a lot of pressure. I mean, you can tell by what he did. I mean, his life. So there was a lot of pressure at that time to go to college, earn a lot of money, and so on. But what he wanted from me was to be happy doing what I did. That stuck with me. He said, you can be anything as long as you're good at it and happy. You can even be a janitor as long as you enjoy what you do and do it well. After I graduated from graduate school, I was going to go into academia. and I realized I didn't want that. I decided to take a chance and follow my dream and be a jeweler, full-time, and it worked out. I became a jeweler. I have been teaching jewelry for a long time, and I even met my husband, who's a jeweler, and we started the school together. So, Bert and I had a special relationship around poetry. I wrote poetry as a kid and continued throughout my life, and learned at a young age to memorize poems that I loved. He would always ask me, what have you memorized? And I'd get up there in front of him and read it, and sometimes I felt a little uncomfortable because those of you who did know my father, he was intense, or like you were saying. I spent a lot of time with him in his study and even sat in on some of his creative writing classes. I went to many of his poetry readings as well as those of other poets. I was pulled to those occasions in part because I got to spend extra time with my father, but also because I loved poetry and language. It was always exciting to be introduced to new poets and to listen to them discuss poetry in general and their own work. So a couple go on in a minute. I wanted to say that I was really in awe of my father. He had an extraordinary photographic memory. Anybody could come to him, and especially in his study where he had bookcases all the way around, and bring up an image or ask something, and he would go to a specific book, and he would pick out a poem that he wanted to read you about that or whatever, but he just knew where everything was. It was amazing. And as a child, that's to see that was pretty amazing. So also, Bert collected small animals made out of clay, bronze, wood, and he would arrange them on top of his bookcases. And I would come in and I would move them around because that's what you do when you're a kid. You kind of move them. And he had to put them back. Bert was not always present, but when he was, he truly listened to me. He enjoyed hearing what I had to say, and he would share his new poems with me. In 6th grade, I entered a poetry contest for my district, sharing a poem about my father and how complicated he was. I already knew that in 6th grade. I won first prize. Okay. I used to know all of these poems by heart. Not anymore. But I'm going to start with Signature. I earn a living and I have a family, but to tell the truth, I'm a wild olive tree. I like cognac and a proud Jewish song, and I live wherever I don't belong. I watch the world decay on every page, on every face. It's a sick man's clouded eye that rolls around in space. And my obsessions, a line I can't revise, to be a gardener in paradise. And this was, one of his few very positive, poems. Gulls have come again. Gulls have come again to consider another beautiful death of the sun. People were flowers that grew by the shore. Twilight takes them home. They fade together at their tables. In the tall green shops, the pulleys of birds lower the last light. The eyelid of a shadow shuts the hills. The sound of the ocean walks over the land. Nobody wants to die. The Dark Birds. This was also the title of one of Bert's books. The dark birds came, I didn't know their name. They walked in Hebrew on the sand, so I'd understand. They sang, the sea flowed, though no one made a road. I shivered on the shore when the water closed its door. Then, as I felt the birds return to me, like ashes to an urn, and sunlight warmed the stones. Fire undressed my bones. Stars climb girders of light. They arrange themselves in the usual place. They quit before dawn and nothing's been done. Then men come out. Their helmets fill the sky. Their cities rise and fall, and men descend, proud carpenters of dew. Man, brief as a storm, more than 5 feet of lightning, twisted and beautiful. Man, made like his roads, with somewhere to go. So this one is called Picture Framing. And he was a picture framer and a gilder. And I used to go with him to the gallery where he worked, and he would take out the gold leaf and, play it a little bit, put a little bit on me. And I remember being there with him. He made frames for lots of famous artists and frames that were in the LA County Museum and in other places. He was a great craftsman. And I still have some of his gold leaf, and I use it in my own work with enamel, which is really special. That stuff lasts forever. Picture framing. My fingers graze in the fields of wood. I sand pine, walnut, bass, and sweat to raise their grain. Paints, powder, and brush are the seasons of my trade. At the end of the day, I drive home the proud cattle of my hands. This was written, the title will give it away, but I remember this night, and this was his father. So, driving home at night with my children after their grandfather's funeral. See how the moon follows us? That's Grandpa's face in the sky. It smiles, so he's still the same. Sleep, the way home's always shorter than the way you came. Shh, the car's a steel measure that swallows the road like a tape, and will all live twice as long as it takes the snail to go around the world on its crumpled skate. This is called And Still. Nobody's honest, nothing matters. That's why I'm always adjusting myself, my chemicals, my complaints. And every day I fly around in my insect-colored car. The city's a carcass, streets quiver like meat. In my own voice, I hear a broom that sighs while it waves farewell to the past. And still it happens. A few leaves come around a corner, demonstrate, then disappear. Mozart arrives in an ice cream truck. A long war ends. I feel like a street light. Tall and radiant, my face was made to shine among the others. I just want to point something out about the book, if you do get it. It has dates underneath the poems. Most of those are wrong because he died in 879, so some of them have a date afterwards. So I just wanted to point that out. How am I doing? Okay. Okay. So let's see. Maybe. This was a poem written for a friend of mine who had died. We love the sunlight on an old wall's broken face. Now and then, We want to lie around all afternoon in a personal cloud. At night, after a storm, we wake our children to show them the fragile city of raindrops in a tree. We wish that one clear hour could last a year, that we could buy a dinner with our dreams and stroll out the door, past reality, down a street where everyone says hello. We filled the moon and the stars and everything on earth with our desire, and still, life doesn't hum like a hedge in summer. Well, maybe one by one we'll announce when it's time to dress in our ideal selves, then celebrate the days that grow fresh from the cleaners, the bakery, the pages of a brand new book. Those beautiful days, those sensible days, almost everyone knew just had to come. I'm going to end on, well, I have two more, but sunflowers, beautiful. I'm going to read the poem Sunflowers. Now, there's a story behind this. If you've read this, it's a very sweet and lovely poem without death or dying or cigarettes or anything that he can often write about. This came about because my father and I were walking in the neighborhood, and there was a little field, like a vacant lot with sunflowers. And we were just amazed. They were just so beautiful and standing there. And we started coming up with images and discussing it. And then we went home and we each wrote a poem. So this is Bert's. No one spoke to the sunflowers, those antique microphones in the vacant lot. So they hung their heads and slowly fell apart. And I have one more. I'm going to just quick, brief introduction to this. And when I left home at 17 and went to live in Israel, Bert and I often corresponded about poetry, either our own or other poets. The correspondence with him was so inspiring. I would just wait for his letters when I'd share some of my thoughts about poetry and shared poems with him. His feedback on my poems was helpful and insightful, and he really did like a lot of what I wrote. When in Israel, I discovered a book by a Czech poet, Andra Lysahorsky, and immediately wrote to Bert about him. I assumed he already knew of him. He knew so many poets. But he didn't, and he was proud of me that I discovered him on my own. This is a poem that he liked, because I have this whole section, a whole bunch of poems that were put aside that he really liked, and this is one by that poet. In the light of summer, take the jewelry from your arms, your neck. Your body has no need of gold in its glistening, naked perfection. You smooth as fields in the sunlight, like the hills from which arise the starry secrets of the lark, the wheat, of azure cornflowers. And cornflowers were his favorite flower. So, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is poet and psychotherapist David Shattuck. He has a regular column in Poetry Flash, Poetry and Healing, and you really, if you haven't read them already, read them. They're powerful, they're healing, they're etc., etc. Vernal Poole is, Vernal, he's a powerful poet. I don't know if you're going to read some of your poems, but I was going to come to the Book of Splendor, which is new and selected poems on spiritual themes. He's written books on psychoanalysis and poetry. I think that's my agent calling. So let's give him a warm welcome, David Shaddock.
I shouldn't have doubted that Richie has the entire world in his mind when he does these introductions, amazing introductions that Richie's done. What an honor to be here, and what a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful event. And how perfectly timed is this? How much we need to remember the spirits that made us, not the spirits that are unmaking us. And Bert is certainly, his poetry is certainly here, and his spirit. I didn't meet Bert by about 5 months or something. Denise Levertov took me to pay a condolence call on the family, and I met Odette and the kids. But I missed meeting Bert, just barely. But Denise was such a fan of his, a late converted fan of his, and she just pointed out this, that, and the other thing of great, great poems that have lived with me. How great to rediscover them through this book, too. But I did know Odette very, very well, and she's just a wonderful spirit herself, and what was. But I'm going to read one of her poems too, and but she helped. She channeled Bert for me and would tell me. During this time I had a very young child and was trying to figure out how you raise kids and write poetry, and she said, "Oh, that wasn't a problem in our world. We just had these big poet picnics every Sunday or sometimes, and the kids all just ran around. The adults sat there and drank wine, ate, and talked poetry." And I thought, it is possible. This is really something. So there's an essay by Victoria Chang in this book about how Bert was a political poet, in a poem called To My Enemies. But it got me thinking, in some way, all of these poems are profoundly, profoundly political, both for what they say and for what they bound out, what they don't say. The terseness and exactness of these poems stands in perfect equipoise with what the horror that's left out. So they create a space with their precision and boundedness that is poised, sometimes quite literally, but often just implicitly, against the horrors of the world. And of course, among those horrors of the world is the Holocaust that was so very present. And so part of the Paul Celan is part of the comparison poet here, even though they don't seem a lot alike. The terseness and the eloquence of what's unsaid, I think, is important to remember about Bert's work. Here's a poem. Anat gave me the suggestions. I figured she would do a better job than me in picking them, and she really did. These are great. This is a great selection I'm about to read, which I can say because I didn't make it. So here's a perfect LA poem, in my opinion. The dryness and the hidden violence and in those mountains, time filled one bush with castor beans, another with wild roses. Death was something distant that made a buzzard stir its whirlpool in the sky. By a tree, I found the deer hunters lost, a flower of ants in the bullet hole, and a root held its leap. There sunlight came down, a trail and green nature reddened at the tip. Yucca stuck at the wind, turned dull and rusted in the fall. Lizards split the rocks, then ran. Snakes passed and left their clothes. Below, a little town, like a tumor, began to spread. Yeah, that's right. Here's a marvelous poem. The Poet. They said, go, rise each day with her, become the reliable dough a family needs. I wouldn't. I walked away from the kitchen, the store she was building in her breast. And everything grows dim, like the little stone brought home from the shore. 2. What will I bring if I come to your house? A cold wind at the door? Bad dreams to your spouse? There isn't a tree in your backyard. The lawns are plastic. The chairs are too hard. No, I wouldn't talk. I'd be full of spite, and I'd strike my head like a match that won't light. 3. Woman, mirror of all my sides, I pass through you to the window. When I lay my hand on the grass, forgive me if I call the earth my child. 4. Always poor, he knows the crickets will leave him small jars of money. He waits, he admires a weed, his dreams are addressed. At night by his desk he becomes a flower. Children are bees in his arms, a little pain making honey. Well, besides convincing me that I should quit right now, what a poem, what a poet, so great. Here's a marvelous one, Pigeon 64. Pigeons. Wherever I go to find peace or an island under palms in the afternoon, at midnight to pity my poor neighborhood, at dawn in the shrubs to look for a child, I hear them. They fly by applauding themselves. I see them. They pray as they walk. Their eyes are halos around a pit. They look amazed. Who are these that come as a cloud to our windows, who rush up like smoke before the town burns? You will find one on a mountain, in a carpenter's shop, at home on the land of an old estate, at the library, in the forehead of paradise. Whoever is mad can accuse them. Thousands were killed in a day. What happens to them happens to me. When I can't sleep, they moan and I'm there. And it's still like that. This is without an MFA, I might add. God knows what might have happened to those poems in a poetry workshop. Pebble. Reminds me of Blake's famous poem, The Pebble. The Clod and the Pebble. Fragment of the first chunk, irregular moon, perpetual cloud, the dust's blind eye, the mite's crude planet, durable friend between the fingers, destroyer of giants, something that grows immense in a shoe. The boulder's crumb, the rock's quiet child, the flower's pure disciple, wasteland's embryo, despair's gray seed, staunch member in the brotherhood of water polishers, wisdom's jewel, the weed's eternal fruit, the raindrop's tomb. And marvelous little bestiary of a poem, obviously maybe written at the zoo. With animals. 1. I feel like the elephant enlightened boulder held back by a chain. 2. I act like the camel with its melancholy, sensual eyes and fastidious lips. 3. I see the dung-colored, crumbling bison, an entire town evicted, even its sofas falling apart. The young look over the fence, their eyes are maple leaves after the rain. American lakes 100 years ago. Their mothers stare at the ground, their fathers shrink like the countryside. The moon, the oldest streetlight, touches them with its intangible snow. Four, I wonder if he ever saw the bison in Golden Gate Park when he wrote that. 4, I envy the tortoise, primordial hand, whose neck is a thumb, measuring time and the grass. 5, I understand the stork, the way it paces, scholar or wandering Jew, whoever waits for the real world to be born. 6, I want to comfort the ostrich, the mad woman, wearing her grandmother's clothes, and be like the mountain goats who lick each other's forehead. God, you could live in that poem for a long time, couldn't you? 7, but look at the huge green toad, sanctimonious phlegm, the crocodile hell's pavement, bats those weird umbrellas that open only at night. 8, the baboon sulks on a shelf, prehistoric priest whose rump is a festival. Its face, a sports car. His eyes, glum headlights that glare. 9, there's that insect winding itself again, another ant berserk on its boulevard. 10, and somewhere a field mouse sits by the sea, which to my mind is the poet. Okay. This is a poem from a longer work of images of Paris. Obviously evokes his, maybe some of you don't know, Odette was French, and she was a hidden child during the Holocaust and wrote an incredible memoir of that event, an homage to the righteous Gentile who saved her, called Doors to Madame Marie. So this obviously poem takes place at one of their visits to France.
That was actually the park my mother grew up in, where she spent a lot.
Yeah, the 19th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we met her there one time. Butte Chaumont, which is a park. I looked up. From this melancholy cliff, the park unrolls, a thick green mist below. And Paris, like a sea without its water, the world's most delicate accumulation of debris. Some days are harpsichords under the chestnut trees. Nothing lasts, their strings break, the gold turns gray, a drizzle falls. And then the gold's restored. People leave their tables, birds their narrow benches in the walls. An old woman sits and bathes her tired feet that looked like marble in a puddle near the market stalls. Amazing, wonderful use of rhyme. Among the antique dealers, a pigeon on the sidewalks, a little baron who struts through a village of bric-a-brac. It rained and rained in the courtyard, and an old man in a gray coat sang to empty windows. The laundry wept for hours. The round slate roofs of grand hotels, mythical in their scales, float through the radiant water of the air. But the buildings of the poor divide their bread for everyone. At night, each window's a glass of wine, and darkness drinks as it passes. I had to give my left toe to write that last two lines. Sometimes a blind violinist helps us through the street. You shed a few coins in his cup. A shopfront glitters like an accordion in the rain. A shopfront glitters like an accordion in the rain. Cars whirl around a moment. People smile, horns blare, headlights shine like brass. The whole square's a carousel. Suddenly, you're a child who's had his turn, a stranger. The others stay, but you go home. Now the dawn's gray chemical. A cafe's a postcard in the distance. A barge strolls through Paris on the Seine. Okay, so I'm going to read, if you'll permit me, this poem of Odette's. Great poem, in my opinion, poem of terrific sadness. To my Dybbuk. When you were alive, we were two, you and me. Now that you are dead, I am two, me and you. For hours and hours every day, I walk my memories, all of yours and our dog. I speak to you in French and English at night. You're in my dreams. There's nothing you don't understand. Your body's young again, graceful, beautiful, the smell and sweat of our passion on the bed, and we are one again. Oh, my Dybbuk, that last night we slept together, you barely of this world. I didn't dare fall asleep, your hand on my body, so you could press for help. Too weak even for that. To let me know you were still alive, your mouth full of blood. You whispered, I love you. After your death in my first dream, you stood in the living room, desperate and gentle. We couldn't touch. You stared and cried, hide me. I wanted to. Paralyzed by fear, it was against the rules. But you're stubborn, kept coming back, slowly showing me how to hide you comfortably. By now I see you more peaceful at my side during the day, in my dreams at night. Early in the evening you make me sleepy, so I should go to our bed and lie down with thought of you. You tell me about Chinese poetry and what to say to our children. You teach me dignity and grace. Still, at times, you cast a spell on me, like in fairy tales. I cry out to you to open up your coffin and let me in. At other times you cry to me to let you in my live body, as you can walk and smile and look, read and listen, and speak through me. You are my Dybbuk, and you know you're welcome. You'll rest in peace in me, your children, your poetry, better than in the cemetery. When I join you one day under the grass, then I can rest. Till then, you can count on me. I'll be strong enough to be two, me and you. I'm going to stop there.
Our third speaker is Eric Gudas, who's written for The Flash, who is going to write the review of this book for The Flash, so that's something to look for. His book of poems is Best Western and Other Poems, and he's got a chapbook with the intriguing title of Beautiful Monster. Yes, indeed. So let's welcome him, Eric Gudas.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to time myself because I don't want to go over. So it's the great sin. Joyce, thank you for bringing me up from Los Angeles. I really appreciate it. And it's been so great to read with Anat and David. It's like rediscovering those poems, hearing them and hearing you both read them. So thank you. Like Poetry Flash, I turned 50 last year, so happy birthday. And so you probably know Joyce. If you say hi to Joyce, she's like, I'm keeping the Flash alive. So I'm just going to take that very personally. Yeah, and Joyce and Richard, you welcomed me writing in the Flash starting in the late 90s. And I remember I asked you, Richard, something about deadlines. And Richard said, don't think that way, man. So that's why you haven't gotten my review of this book yet, but everybody should get this book. Dana Levin and Adele Elise Williams did a great job on it. Daniel Myers worked on it too, and there's a great companion website, so don't walk out without one. The Flash and this reading series are a West Coast institution, and Bert is truly a West Coast poet. I have to say it feels a little bit weird calling him Bert, since I was too young ever to have known him, but it seems like that's what everybody does. He published many of his poems in West Coast journals and 4 of his 5 books through West Coast presses. And I have some visual aids. Naomi Raplansky, who died earlier this year at age 104, first introduced me to Bert's work in the mid-90s. Naomi and Bert were friends for many decades. So this is her obituary in the New York Times. If you didn't see it, no one would have been more surprised that she got a 3/4 of a page. And this is Naomi in 1941. This is Bert at probably about the same age, but maybe 10 years later. She was 10 years older than he was. So Bert and Naomi met in the 1950s when both were part of the poetry world in LA, along with Sid Gershgorin, who's here tonight. And they published in journals like California Quarterly and Coastline. So you've got somebody who was part of that scene right here. The first time I read his poems, Bert's poems, was in Naomi's copies of his books, because that was all there was. I think maybe I don't even need this mic. Stand back a little bit. And a lot of them were signed by Bert. So I got to see his beautiful cursive. They revered each other's work, and they each drew on their very varied work experiences in their poems. So I'm going to read a poem of Naomi's called When I Melt Down. She wrote this in 1944 after working in a foundry during the war in Brooklyn, pouring metal into mold. So the metaphor behind this poem comes from her work life. When I melt down in your furnace, I want to take shape in your mold. Blast me, cast me, change me before the wind turns cold. Look from the red-hot center, I lift up my white-hot face. My nose finds its bridge as always, my eyes flow back into place. Neither destroyed nor diamond, I walk from the core of your flame. The rain does not hiss when it hits me, and I answer to my old name. So I just got some issues of the California Quarterly off of eBay. Again, we've got a participant in this world, in that world right here. And so this is from volume 3, number 3, 1954. And I found a poem of Bert's that I had never seen. And it reminds me that he started off as now what we call a formalist. And I think you can see it, as David pointed out, in some of the couplets that flow through his poems. But also, I think there's sort of there's a rigor that even in his free verse kind of shows that underlying technique. This is called The Love Romantics Have. In the poem, it's a small r, romantics. The love romantics have that makes them shake and sweat beside a golden head is wonderful and sad and aches between the legs. Such lovers cannot wait to set their marriage date. But those sweethearts who have explored instead, inside and out of bed, the sense of I and thou goes slowly to the judge. They wear each other's breath and only fear love's death. So this is Bert's first book, Early Rain. It was published by Alan Swallow, a venerable Western States publisher out of Denver. I think you could have gotten this for 75 cents in 1960. I took the wild. An old man is a bundle of leaves. I saw one scattered in the street. The police came. They put his pieces, like stolen jewels, in a little can. People felt themselves. Slowly, someone nobody saw slipped a white glove over his hand. Before I went, I closed my eyes and took the wild poinsettia that grew where his mouth had been. This is, as Anat mentioned, the Dark Birds. And Anat read the title poem. This is Bert's only poem from a New York press, 1968, Doubleday. They who waste me. When I ask for a hand, they give me a shovel. If I complain, they say, worms are needles at work to clothe a corpse for spring. I sigh. Whoever breathes has inhaled a neighbor. Sunlight on the Wall came out in 1975 and from Kayak Press, George Hitchcock. It's got collages by John Digby. A lot of poets published in Kayak magazine. And the rest of the poems I'm going to read are from this book called The Wild Olive Tree and the Blue Cafe, which gathers Wild Olive Tree, which was published by the West Coast Poetry Review in 1979, and then the other manuscript I think Bert had ready at the time of his death, The Blue Cafe, came out from was combined by Jazz Press and Papa-Bach Books in 1981. This is another section from Postcards, Train. It's 4 short poems. Sunlight plays its flute in the treetops. A village where a church with one arm raised to the sky sinks in a cauldron of tiles, and a castle whose towers rise like a charred town from the murky water of its walls. Train station. Empty platform. Not even a cat. A flock of bells crosses the tracks. Green keeps changing itself from green to green. This is one poem from a sequence called Images. Now the night drives up. Distant buildings are golden radiators. The sky is a black cloud full of sparks. Sirens, dogs, and he just stood there by the police car with those handcuffs on, staring at the moon. Naomi Raplansky put me in touch with Bert Meyers, and we became friends around the time her book Doors to Madame Marie came out. Once Odette showed me a bookshelf of Bert's poetry library at her home in Berkeley. I don't think it was as many books as Anat mentioned, but maybe an abbreviated version. And I looked carefully at the time, but I wish I'd written more titles down. But I was struck by how very few books by American poets there were. I specifically remember a selection of the Hungarian poet Attila József's work in a translation by John Bachti. József was born in 1905 and died in 1937. He was, I think, ejected from the Hungarian Communist Party for being into psychoanalysis. So, and although he was profoundly learned about poetry, Bert's poems contain almost no literary allusions, but as you'll hear, he alludes to the following poem by József, Frost, written in 1932. And again, this is John Bachti's translation. Frost. Autumn was wild and brooding. Now a cool snow would like to fall. But the season is impatient, drumming on frost's hard, clear window. This is the time of bankers and generals, this present time, this hammer-hardened cold, this flashing, this knife time. Steel clanks in the armored sky. Frost stabs you, pierces rags and lungs. Oh, this screeching, grinding wheel time. Behind it, how many silent cold loaves of bread, tin cans, piles of frozen things. Oh, shop window time. And they are screaming, pass me that rock, give me that lead pipe, kill him, stomp him, smash his face. Oh, what a time, what a time. These days, homage to Attila József. These days, everything's bad. The future waits in a button. No one plans, nobody says 3 years from now. Evening falls upon a porch, bloody, black and white. It opens like the paper. Someone bursts into flames. Winter, a grim warehouse, delivers the wind. An angry truck rattles by, the inconsolable self strumming its gas pedal, tuning up for the storm. Lies, so many lies. Windows malignant with things. When at last the nail strangles the hammer, and even the ant howls. Then rockets, rockets, oh, what a time, what a time. And like an old ideal, the moon's been reached. A few astonished flies wrinkle the dust on its face. Be like the rain that wears a ragged coat and finds a lamp in the smallest stone and sings for nothing from street to street. This is part 3 of a 3-part poem called Landscapes Along the Coast. You stare, propped like a sick man from the car's enchanted bed. A hill nibbles at a field's green fork. An old arthritic fence hobbles up toward a cloud. A little factory smoke grows abstract in the sky. Only the cows have reached perfection. Their quiet minds look empty. The landscape requires them. When the cows eat, the ground, the shadows, even boulders rise and bow to each other. Far away, the suburbs, one cube cloning itself like the stone at the Veterans Cemetery. And all along the coast, the sun drives over the sea. Its windshields glitter in the waves. This is a prose poem, The Old Engraver. An old engraver was out of work. He lived alone with his tools. It was summer. The sky wore jeans, and every day the backyard opened its familiar shop, a worm scrolling along, the trees elaborating themselves. But in the street, children were grinding each other between the gears of their parents' wrath. Should he just walk around without a point? So each morning he printed lots of money, and all the children went to the candy store and became sweet. Then the police appeared. The old engraver was out in the yard hanging up dollars to dry with his underwear. He had to go to jail. And all the children turned into broken glass until even the mountains, those solitary herds, bled to death. The moon, A giant freezer hummed. It was going to be used. This is my favorite Bert Meyers poem, A Citizen. 1. The spider I hit, loose thread on the floor, clenches its fist. The cat lies down. It looks at me as if through a window. 2. I'm a coat hanger twisted by rage. 3. Everything shrinks from my hands, that landscape threatened by planes, a woman's astonished face. 4. I served the giant who ate the villages, whose arms swept aside the stars like raindrops on a windshield, who broke the sky, man's sacred mirror, and promised peace. 5. I did these things for freedom, endless as a boulevard where all the lights are green. 6. My car won't start. Dead leaves follow me. They're scribbling my name. 7. I'm a swastika, the headless man whose iron limbs grind the world. 8. I want to change. Even a wall gets painted again. The Wild Olive Tree is dedicated to the memory of Bert's father. We've already heard one poem from that period, Manuel Myers, who was born in 1897 and died in 1971. And this is a 5-part elegy called Homecoming. 1. My father was a tender man whose blue eyes would overcast by noon. Every dusk he floated home in the soiled wind of his clothes. I flew to the ceiling in his arms. The silverware sang as he came to the table, and the bright room rolled like a train that climbs its ladder through the dark. 2. His hands are cobwebs full of flies, trembling in his lap. They've locked him up with strangers because he drools too much, and I imagine freeing him. We'd go to a town that isn't there, where everyone he cries for now, wrapped in the bed's thick bandage, would come to shake his hand. He laughs. He lifts the child and grows. He drinks and drinks the meadowlark. He smooths a stone's gray hair. But he stinks. He's a huge bib. A loose scab, a rotten cornflake clings to his lip. 3. There are mouths so cold the salmon-colored tongue leaps without a sound. Lonely ditches where a broken dove mourns in the rubble of a face. Men at the mercy of their parts, grime in the skull, despair corroding the rainbows in their wires. 4. My home was a watercolor I left in the rain. Tonight the crickets ring and ring. Nobody answers. The shadows of men are looking for blood. Someone has stepped on the classical face of the moon. Dawn comes, a gradual mountain range of ashes. 5. The mockingbirds, those joyful books that opened in the sky, then close their pages on a branch, awake and go mad, chewing the bones of their old songs, and the flies, such tiny fenders, batter themselves in the air. This is part 3 of what I think must be a companion poem called Lament. I'm just going to read the last part. What else awakes and knows it was born, it will die. The same clouds come and go. The same bird sings or flies. And this is the last poem I'll read. I think it's one of the most beautiful love poems in any language ever. Gently, gently. We too began with joy. Then sickness came, then poverty. We were poor, so poor, our children were our only friends. Gently, gently, through anger and pain, love justified itself, like the nails in the house during a storm. Somehow we created hope, reliable drum in the shadow's wrist, a tuning fork on the sidewalk of dreams. At night, I was the one who became a cello strung with all our roads, where memory hums to itself like a tire. And you, mad as a clarinet where the street divides, a city of raindrops in a bush, the slow honey that drips from the sky's old ladle. The reason I'm frightened of death. I swear by the wings love spreads at my waist, that I'll carry your tune until my tired strings break. Thank you.
This has just been a lovely evening, and it's not over yet. Thanks to these three amazing speakers, Anat Silvera, Bert's daughter, David Shattuck, Eric Gudas. Thanks to the spirits of Odette Myers and Bert Meyers. I'm sure they're here enjoying with us. And please take a look at this gorgeous book. And we have all kinds of refreshments. We have wine, we have snacks, we've got all kinds of things back at the back of the room. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you.